Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Guido Lena from UEAPME. I coordinate the Sustainable Development Unit, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all here today again to the second session of this conference. This afternoon, we will have the chance to discuss more in detail some of the aspects already analyzed this morning, but also to tackle on new issues like the support given from ECA and the national level, which is probably definitely very interesting for companies which are obliged to register or want to plan to register under REACH. So, and afterward, in the end of this session, as you know, there will be the possibility for companies to have one-to-one sessions. So I'm sure we will inform you exactly on the location and all the aspects in the end of this session. So I would say we can immediately go forward with the first speaker, who is Mrs. Eva Valkovicova, scientific expert ECA. And Eva has actually been working in ECA since 2007. First, in the help desk, she was responsible for organizing a network of the national help desk. And since 2011, she's been working in the evaluation directorate of ECA as an environmental assessor of registration dossiers. And before, in her homeland, in her home country, Slovakia, she worked in the competent authority for REACH, CLP, and biocides. So I leave her the floor to deal with the background and in practice registration dossier, data collection, and testing. Please, Eva.
Thank you very much. So this would be more the background, and then somebody else is going to present the more in practice. Now I was only wishing I had the strong voice as Christian not to make you fall asleep after lunch. So let's see. We have heard that the substance identification is the very important thing that you need to have. And we have heard that it's time for you to start preparation for registration right now. So let's maybe have a look on what are the registration dossiers. There are a few steps that you need to follow in order to compile your registration dossier. So first of all, you need to understand your substance and the information requirements. Then you need to gather the hazard data. You need to work together in a sieve. And then also to fulfill your data gaps. You need to agree on the classification and labeling, and then gather information and uses, so that at the end you can do the assessment of the risks of your substance and impose risk management measures. And all this basically for the goal that you can register your substance before the 31st of May 2018. This slide was just an overview of what I will be talking about. And now we start with the standard information requirements. So the standard information requirements are set in REACH Annex 7 for the substances of 1 to 10 tons. And there are a set of information that you need to provide in your registration dossier on your substance. Of course, there are the physicochemical properties, then there are the toxicological and ecotoxicological data. As you can see on this slide, and the table is then also, of course, available on our website, there is only one vertebrate test for this particular tonnage band for substances of 1 to 10 tons. Then for this tonnage band of 1 to 10 tons, you have the possibility to benefit from the reduced information requirements in case you are able to prove that your substance is of low risk. And then that means you can submit your registration dossier only with the physicochemical information as required by the Annex 7 of REACH. We at ECA have prepared an inventory, which is called an Annex 3 inventory, that you should check. And if you do find your substance on the list, then we at ECA believe that this substance is not of a low risk, and therefore you would not be able to benefit from these reduced information requirements. This list has around 65,000 substances, and we have used different prediction models to predict whether the substances could pose any risk or not. On the website, that is also on the slides, you will find also practical examples in which can lead you to your thinking how you can assess if your substance can be of low risk or not. Then the standard registration requirements for substances of the higher tonnage band that also belong to the 2018 deadline. So the substances manufactured or imported in 10 to 100 tons, they have a cumulative information requirement. So you need all the information of Annex 7 or the ones that you would use for substances from 1 to 10 tons, plus all the information requirements from the Annex 8. So therefore, in this second table, you see that there is a little bit more non-vertebrate animal endpoints, especially for human health and for environment. And then you have also more vertebrate animal endpoints. For this tonnage band, you also need to prepare your chemical safety report. Now, we have more or less, I would stop here with informing you what are the information requirements, because you just go to REACH and Annex 7 and 8, and you see what exactly they are. What is more important is to maybe explain what should be the strategy for you to gather this information, and then how you can omit or not to do certain tests. So this slide explains that, first of all, of course, you need to collect all information that you have. And REACH is actually saying that you should really collect all available information, not only what the REACH says. But if you are the manufacturer or importer, you should try to understand your substance and really collect everything that you can. You do this, of course, in your company. You check the external scientific sources or existing reports and so on. Then you continue that you need to consider your information needs. So that's the time when you open REACH and you check what are your information requirements for your tonnage band. Then you identify the missing information. So you exactly match which information you don't have, and therefore then you need to get this information by sharing the data in the sieves. And the data needs to be of sufficient quality, and of course very often you can also use data from a similar substance to fulfill your information requirements for your own substance. And then at the end you generate the new information. So this is mainly meant testing, or then you can use the adaptations which don't need to be scientifically justified. The animal testing should be used as a last resort, so you should always avoid the animal testing wherever possible, mostly by sharing the data and then by using the adaptations. Whenever you do that, then you need to justify the use of the adaptation, because that is of a crucial importance for the acceptance of these adaptations. And we have updated or published also practical guides. So for example, the practical guide on how to use the alternatives to animal testing is a very useful one that explains a bit more in detail. And then the practical guide on how to use and report QSARs is also a good one, and it gives even information about free tools that you can use. However, this is maybe more for the contractor or consultant. Then, of course, the practical guide that was already mentioned before, the one on the SME, for the SME managers, to how to fulfill your information requirements from 1 to 10 tons and 10 to 100 tons. That one is a very, let's say, a very good one to read, because it, in very simple terms, explains all the information that are needed for your registration dossier. Now, I talk a lot about these adaptations, so maybe now let's have a look what are these adaptations. We call them also waivers, And in simple words, it is a way how you decide that you don't need to do the testing, but you can use some specific rules or general rules that are in the REACH regulation for not really doing the test. So there are there are two types. The specific rules are in the column 2 of REACH annexes of 7 to 10. And an example of that one is, for example, if your substance is not soluble, then you can, of course, omit of doing certain tests. Now, the general rules, they are stipulated in Annex 11, and these are different situations where you, for example, can use all the already existing data, and you don't need to do new testing, or the testing is technically not possible for certain types of substances, or then you can use the exposure-based waiving. So if you can prove that there is no exposure to your substance, then you also don't need to do certain tests. And in the further slides now, I will concentrate on the ones in orange, which are. Let's start with the weight of evidence, for example. So the weight of evidence is when you use several independent sources of information in a combination. Let's say that you have single pieces of evidence which you cannot submit as your key study because it doesn't provide enough information, because it's not reliable enough and so on, but you have more of this information which show that the result is the same. So then in this weight of evidence approach, you can combine all these studies, and a scientific expert can say, I am very sure that this substance has or does not have this property. Then very often it can also, of course, also happen that you have conflicting studies, and then the scientific expert needs to judge or needs to give a certain weight to these different pieces of information. For the weight of evidence, for example, but maybe I say the practical example is written there, but you can have an in vitro study, or you can have a read across, and then you can have a QSAR result, and you also combine this into one outcome. Now, what are the QSARs? They are the qualitative or quantitative structure activity relationship models, and they can be a very good. They can give very good results, mostly for the simpler properties. So, for example, FISCEM, and a little bit less reliable results for the more complex properties. However, they still can give you an indication of how the substance can behave. So, for example, you still can use it even if it's less reliable, but in a combination in the weight of evidence. There is the QSAR toolbox, of course, that is freely available on our website that you can use, or your contractor can use, and it can be used also for read across. Oops. Next one. Did you wake up? Good. Now I use and now. The next adaptation is are the in vitro. So what means in vitro? It is that the experiments are performed in a controlled environment, not in the animals, but in a test tubes or a petri dish. And then if there is a suitable in vitro method, then can be used, of course, for adaptations. Now, recently in 2016, some of the in vitro methods or some of the annexes of REACH were updated, so that some of the in vitro methods got or became the standard information requirements, that you have to use first the in vitro methods before you test in the animals. And the last adaptation that I will now explain is the grouping of substances and read across. So this approach can be used when you have useful information of good quality from a similar substance or more substances, and you are kind of able to predict what is how your substance is going to behave, because it is very similar, because it has a similar ways how it reacts and so on. So here very important is, of course, to always document it very well. You always need to have a matrix where you show how the chemicals behave and why is it okay to use the data from a different substance in order to fulfill your own information requirements. So now when we have seen all the adaptations, then very important also in your thinking on and preparing your testing strategy is to really understand your substance. And then because, for example, you might have a substance that is in a solution, but it actually breaks down to different solutions. So then you should test the breakdown products and not really the substance as such. If you have a UVCB or a multi-constituent substance, you need to test the representative sample. Then if you know, for example, that the workers are exposed to vapors, then you need to test the inhalation and not oral route and so on. And then on our website we have created a table that is a little bit helping. So of course you have some properties, and then on the right side you have written which test you necessarily do not need if your substance is a gas or inorganic substance. So this workflow now is basically showing the approach that you can take for the data gathering. When you have all your data, which we call now existing data, then you see if you can, by using all these general adaptations, whether you can fulfill the information requirement without testing. So you try to do this weight of evidence and when it is enough, because it can meet the information requirements and allow for classification, then you don't need to go further. If it's not enough and you need more data, then you would go first for the in vitro. You can also, of course, always see whether this data from similar substances or this so-called read across is possible. And if it's still not enough, then you would test in vivo, so in animals. Now, this information requirements update slide is here to scare you and to wake you up, but I am not going to explain it much, and it's really only for your information. As I mentioned, that in 2016, the REACH annexes were updated. So then the skin corrosion irritation, basically the ones in the left in orange, skin corrosion irritation, eye irritation, and skin sensitization, the requirements were changed. So now you need to provide the in vitro, so the one not in animals. And then only if you are not able to classify your substance based on this test, then you are allowed to do the in vivo. And on the right side, there are the available test methods. Then on our website, we have also tried to gather more practical hints and tips for you as SMEs. So for example, we have on the website the time needed that we think is necessary to do certain tests. Then the quality, for example, the quality of substances, the quantity of the substances that you need to send to the laboratory in order to do the test, and then the indicative costs of generating the new information. And then, as it was already mentioned before, also for the downstream users, then you also need to make sure that your critical substances are or will be registered, and then your users need to be covered, so you need to communicate this up your supply chain to your distributor. So now let's say that we are a SME and we went through all the steps, we have collected the available information, we considered the needs, we identified the information that are missing, and we have even already contacted the laboratory, we did the tests, they did the tests and sent us the results. So now the classification and labeling is coming. So first of all, of course, if there is a harmonized classification, you need to use that one. If there isn't, you need to do the assessment of all your data that you have, and you need to classify accordingly. then you should agree the classification in your sieve. However, there might be situations where, because, for example, an impurity that only you have, your substance can be classified differently, and you need to show this in your member dossier. And then, of course, all this gathering of information about your chemical and registering has a higher purpose. And the higher purpose is, of course, this assessment of risk and then ensuring the safe use of the chemical. Now, assessing risk and ensure the safe use. So for the substances that you import or manufacture in 1 to 10 years, 10 tons per year, you don't need to do the chemical safety report. However, you still need to have the information on use and exposure, and then the guidance on safe use. For substances in the higher tonnage band, the 10 to 100, you do need the chemical safety report. So you need to have the hazard assessment and then the assessment of whether your substance is a PBT or a VPVB. And then in case that your substance is classified or is a PBT, then you also need the exposure assessment and the exposure scenarios and the risk characterization. And as was already mentioned also before, there is the CASAR tool that may help you to do this. So then we are hopefully having all the information that we need, and we have done all the risk assessment, and now we need to register. So we really need to create the registration dossier. And as we have heard already during the morning sessions, you need the Euclid 6 in order to input all your data, and then you need the ReachIT online system to submit your registration dossier. And there, for sure, you shall make sure that your data in ReachIT are up to date, that the contact people are up to date, because ECHA is also using ReachIT a lot for messaging you and giving you information. And then, of course, it would not be a nice situation if you find out that your user account is blocked, and then ECHA Help Desk will have a lot of blocked user accounts, and then there you will miss your registration only because of that. So you better check all these info already now. And then you are all set. You can submit the registration. So for the joint submission of data, of course, there's the certain parts that are jointly submitted. And here I would like to reiterate again that, of course, it's submitted by the lead, but the lead really needs the support of the co-registrants to be cooperative, to agree on many things. So jointly, you are submitting the substance identity profile, the physicochemical, toxicological, and ecotoxicological properties, and then the classification and labeling. You can opt out for certain information, but you still need to be part of the joint submission. And then the individual part of your member dossier that every co-registrant has to submit himself is including the substance identification and the uses and conditions of use of the substance through the life cycle. And then, least but not last, the chemical safety report. If it's a substance from 10 to 100 tons, you can decide if to do it jointly or by the lead on behalf of all the members, or upon certain agreements, you can also do it individually. So the key messages towards the end are, of course, to understand the substance and the information requirements, to try to find good support in your company, in the sieve, hiring a consultant, always share the data, and then the animal testing to be only last resort. Make sure that you and your customers use the substance safely, and then, of course, do not forget to register by May 2018. And that would be everything from me.